Canon is gearing up to announce the EOS R5 Mark II later this year. And while many are looking forward to this announcement, me included, I have 10 issues that I hope Canon addresses in the EOS R5 Mark II. Issues that interfere with workflow, issues that get in the way of delivering content, and issues that are, well, just downright annoying. What are they? Well, stick around after this short break for my top 10 issues that I hope Canon addresses with the EOS R5 Mark II. But first, please do me a favor. Follow me on Twitter, but most importantly, please subscribe to this channel. It doesn't cost you anything and really does help this channel grow. And if you're already a subscriber, thanks so much for your support. I've been shooting with the Canon EOS R5 now for the better part of 3 years. It's the camera I'm shooting with right now. I had it the very first day it was available, and, well, to be correct, technically correct, I actually was shooting with the Canon EOS R5 1 week before it started shipping because Canon Canada lent me a unit, and I've been pretty impressed with it. I've shot well over 1,100 videos and thousands of stills. In fact, I don't know how many stills I've shot. Just doing a single test of a memory card or a lens requires shooting thousands and thousands of images. I use the Canon EOS R5 as my daily driver. It's a pretty rare occasion where I don't touch the camera in any way whatsoever. I'm not shooting, I'm not filming. So over those 3 years, I've come up with about 10 or 11 issues that I find really annoying that I hope Canon fixes in the EOS R5 Mark II. Now, I had given hopes that a lot of these were going to be fixed in a firmware update, but as we're getting ready, we're at 3 years, we're getting ready for a refresh of the camera with the EOS R5 Mark II. I'm willing to bet that most of these are going to be fixed in a, well, successor in a new unit in the EOS R5 Mark II. So let's get right to those issues. The number one issue is, you're not going to be surprised by this one, that 30-minute record limit. When you're shooting video, there's no reason to have a 30-minute record limit. And to be fair to Canon and also the camera, that 30-minute record limit is only present when you're shooting and recording directly to the storage in the camera, such as the SD card slot or the CF Express Type B card slot. If you're actually shooting over HDMI, if you're shooting with a Ninja 5, or if you're streaming over USB-C, well, then guess what? There's no record limit in any way whatsoever. And there's no doubt that it's going to be lifted in the EOS R5 Mark II. Since the R3 has come out, Canon has lifted that 30-minute record limit from pretty much every camera since. No 30-minute record limit. You might still have some overheating, but no 30-minute record limit. And that leads me to the number 2 item, that overheating. Now, since firmware 1.6, that large-scale overheating that pretty much happened anytime you went out and started shooting in 80-degree plus heat is pretty much gone. With firmware 1.6, Canon provided a new capability, and it's called Auto Temp Power Off. Now, when you first apply that firmware update, you apply it to the camera. So if you're shooting with a Canon R5 and it's firmware 1.6 or later, you will still get that overheating unless you set that Auto Temp Power Off to high. So make sure you choose that setting. But also when you're shooting with a Canon EOS R5, especially if you're shooting outside and you have that setting, also have that LCD flipped out, because right behind where the LCD sits, right in here, that's where the sensor, that's where the image processor is. So by keeping the LCD closed like this, what you're essentially doing is it's like putting a coat on the camera. You're keeping that heat inside. So flipping out that LCD will really help deal with the heat, auto temp power off, and also have your LCD automatically go off after about 15 or 30 seconds. So while firmware 1.6 really does improve the camera's ability to shoot in all temperatures, whether it be 70 degrees outside, 80 degrees outside, or way up to almost 100 degrees as tested by the Def Director in modes 8K RAW at 30 frames per second, or 8K oversample 4K, that's the 4K HQ/4K fine modes. There is definitely a need for improvement in the thermal architecture. We shouldn't have to worry about having the LCD flipped out or putting the high auto temp power off to high. I would like to see some better thermal architecture. The camera doesn't require that much in terms of maybe 10, 15 cents per camera. All they have to do is put in heat pipes, or maybe even just a copper plate between the processor and the image sensor directly to the shell of the camera. That would greatly dissipate heat. We've seen this with tests. So a better thermal architecture in the R5 is something I would definitely like to see, well, or in the R5 Mark II. Now for the third item, this one hasn't really bothered me for much of 3 years, because here where I shoot in Ontario, it's a very busy, very built up area. So I don't often shoot wide because if I do, I'm going to be getting power lines. I'm going to be getting other people in the shot. So what I quite often shoot is at around 50 millimeters, and that works out really well. I can go into the parks and I can shoot it as though I'm way up north in Canada's hinterland, which isn't all that far away. It's only about 30 to 60 minutes north. And yeah, we're in the barren, well, not barren, there's trees, boreal forests all over the place. But this past week when I was in Vancouver, my God, the scenery is just absolutely stunning. The trees, the mountains, the beaches, pretty well everything I shot was at 24 millimeters. And boy, did that IBIS wobble get in the way. There's nothing worse than shooting a landscape and seeing it wobble. I'm standing still, I'm not even moving, and it's creating a wobble. And it's really, really annoying because that wobble, you can't fix it in post. There's no way to fix it. And a lot of times you have to dump out the footage. But because I shot so much footage at 24 millimeters on the 24 to 105, I have to work with it. I'm stuck with it. And it's frustrating. Every time I look at the footage, I see it and it really irritates me. Now, my wife, she looks at it, my son, and they look at it. They don't really see the annoyance of this. But for me, I'm back in Ontario, I'm no longer in British Columbia. The cost to go and reshoot that is very, very prohibitive. So this IBIS wobble for a lot of ordinary or even professional filmmakers using the Canon EOS R5, it's really annoying. And yes, depending on the lens you're shooting with, you can disable IBIS now. You can disable it with a 16 millimeter, and most likely you can disable it with a 24 to 105. And you can also disable it by turning off image stabilization on the lens. That will also turn off IBIS in the camera. But it's annoying. Canon, the IBIS in the R5 is very good. It's better than a lot of the competition. But if you're going to produce some wobbling in the image, then who cares how good it is? Please institute some sort of fix that if you're shooting at 24 millimeters or anywhere from 24 up to around 35 millimeters, then fix it so that we don't have to deal with it. Because yes, I knew about this, but because in 3 years of shooting, mostly at around 35 to 50 millimeters, occasionally at 24 millimeters where I just really didn't notice that wobble, I didn't even think of it. I didn't think of it till I got back, because even when I looked through the LCD to see what my footage looked like, even with my glasses on, I didn't detect any wobble. You don't see it on such a small screen. You only get to see it when you're back, when your trip's over, when you can't reshoot it anymore. And that IBIS wobble, it's not fixed. Don't believe people telling you it's fixed. So Canon, please fix the IBIS wobble. Don't let us wait for the EOS R5 Mark II. Put it in the big firmware update coming that's being promised. Please fix that IBIS wobble. It should have been fixed years ago, long before the overheating was fixed. And the next item on my list of issues is no audio when recording slow motion. Canon, please let us decide if we want the audio or not. It's very easy in post to detach the audio and toss it out, or uncheck it so that way it's not in our timeline. It's pretty easy to do. But for those times where we do want the audio, the number of steps we have to jump through to record audio separately, then in post, try to make it work. There are times when we're taking that audio or we're taking that video clip and we're slowly ramping it up or slowly ramping it down, and having that audio there is a creative choice. So please bring that back, or actually allow us to record audio by default. We can always have a toggle in the settings to turn it off, but like I said, it's easy to remove in post. And the next issue I want to talk about has to do with storage. These CF Express Type B cards, I think, are absolutely phenomenal, but there are a few issues with them. Now, the first issue I'm going to talk about is deciding which to record to. Now, in the Canon R5, the way I have it set up right now, for photos, I've set it in camera to record to both card slots. Now, I can choose one card slot over the other, and it works perfectly fine. But for video modes, when I'm shooting video, it doesn't quite work that way. I started out when I first got the camera, I said, okay, you know what? Record all video to the CF Express Type B. Because if you're shooting an hour or more of 4K video, 4K HQ video, and it's going to that SD card, boy, it can take an hour or longer to copy everything off. And with these CF Express Type B cards, they're so fast, I don't even have to copy the information off. I can transcode right on the card and then copy off what I need, saving me a huge amount of time. So while I can set the camera up to record video to this card and this card only, as soon as I take this card out, do anything with it, I can just take it out and immediately put it back in. With the camera powered off, Well, here's what happens. Instead of recording video to this card, it decides to default all the way over to the SD card, and it's really annoying. And for about a year or two, I actually just removed the SD card altogether so I wouldn't forget. Yeah, the only problem with that is you lose your redundancy. So again, when I was in Vancouver, I put in a 1 terabyte V60 card from Angelbird, so that way I at least had a backup. And while I was recording video to both card slots, because I knew what would happen, I didn't want to have it just record to this card. I wanted the backup. It worked perfectly fine, but still it will switch back and forth, and that defeats the whole purpose of setting one card as the primary card for video. So please fix that. The other thing I'd like to have fixed too is what I'm holding in my hands right here is a 4 terabyte CF Express Type B card from Angelbird. What we need is for Canon to support GPT or GUID. By supporting those partition tables, we can support file, or not just file sizes, we can support storage well in excess of 2 terabytes, 4 terabytes being the largest on the market right now. So that would be really, really beneficial. And also Canon, please support Gen 4. Already we see on various storage for computers that there is Gen 4 supported. And what Gen 4 does is allows us to have the same speeds, the same speed limits as found in Type C cards. Type B right now has a theoretical limit of around 2,000 megabytes per second continuous write. That's pretty fast. That's very, very fast. Now, what we're seeing in the field is right now around 1.5 gigabytes. Supporting Gen 4 would double that. Instead of around 1.5 gigabytes, could take it up to 3,000 gigabytes, or 3,000 megabytes, or even pushing it faster, theoretically up to around 3.6 gigabytes. 3.6 gigabytes on a Type B card by just supporting Gen 4. So there's some issues I'd like to see fixed, but definitely some enhancements when it comes to internal storage options. Another issue I'd like fixed has to do with the autofocus system. And I can tell you from traveling this past week, from shooting bears at, yes, these are bears I was on Grouse Mountain, I was walking up this trail and I came across these brown bears. And look at that, eye autofocus is working perfectly. And this owl, again, eye autofocus is working perfectly. The Canon EOS R5 does very good at tracking eyes for animals, birds. I know birds are animals, as are humans, but human eye autofocus, torso, head detection, it does a very, very good job. But where the autofocus kind of lets us down is, let's say I'm at some sort of school event and I want to capture my son, or he's doing karate. Well, the eye autofocus works really well until my son goes between another student or something. And guess what? It now locks onto that student instead of my son. And yes, you can play around with the settings in the autofocus, but they don't really work very well. What we need to see to fix this issue is to be able to say, okay, I'm going to tap on this person and you're going to stick and follow this person. And that would be huge. That would really help us in crowded situations where we want to focus on one person. So while the autofocus system in the Canon EOS R5 is very accurate, when it comes to crowded areas, there's definitely rooms for improvement. The level of detail that we get when we're recording in Canon's 8K oversample modes, such as 4K 30, 4K HQ, it's amazing. That's the one mode I shoot in almost all the time. The only time I'm not shooting is if I'm shooting in 4K 120 or I'm shooting 8K. It's absolutely stunning. But as soon as we move to modes like 4K 60, which is what Tony Northrup and others like to shoot at, the level of detail significantly falls off. And what I would like to see is that fixed in the EOS R5 Mark II to see 8K oversample 4K extended from not just 4K 24, 25, and 30, but up to 50 and 60 frames per second, and even in 4K 120 to give us just a little bit more detail. Another thing I would like to see help with is to improve low light performance. And there's one way to improve low light performance and to provide more detail in 4K 60, 4K 120, and that's to provide a stacked sensor. I know what you're thinking. Okay, a stacked sensor in a camera that costs $4,000 or less, it's just not going to happen. It doesn't make sense. It's too expensive. Well, tell that to Nikon, because in the Nikon Z8, it has a stacked sensor, the same stacked sensor found in the Nikon Z9. So I think it's very possible to see the Canon EOS R5, especially Canon. I mean, Nikon did it. Look, in their Nikon Z8 for $39.99, they've got a stacked sensor. It's in that camera. I think Canon's going to take another look at the Nikon Z8 and consider putting a stacked sensor in the Canon EOS R5 Mark II. That's, of course, if they haven't already considered this and isn't already working on the camera. And while I love the flippy screen, and I have ever since it came out in the, well, this camera here, this is not the R5, this is the 70D, I fell in love with this thing. I thought, wow, for video shooters, this is absolutely incredible. But then when I got the R5 and I got the 800mm and I was lining up to shoot the stars, the planets, and the moon, yeah, I found it rather annoying because here I am over here. This is where my line of sight is when I'm looking here. But to line up to the planets, I look directly here, almost as though I'm looking directly through the viewfinder. I'm looking like you, if you've ever shot with a gun, it's the same thing lining up your sights. Sony's A7 R5, the one thing I think they did terrific with that camera is the 4-axis LCD. I really do hope that Canon is planning on fixing the whole articulating LCD, that flippy screen, and coming out with a 4-axis LCD. I think that's going to solve the problem. It's going to give us the flippy screen that videographers want, but when we want to line things up directly, that's where that 4-axis screen really comes in. But for the last item on the list, and this one here, you're probably not surprised at what it is. It's one of the biggest issues that's facing Canon today. And that's the lack of third-party approved lenses for the R system, for the RF mount. Canon has received more blowback on this than anything else, and it's not necessarily an issue with the camera itself, it's with the available lenses. Well, Canon has some really incredible L-series glass, the 100 to 500 that I have right here. I mean, yes, it's sharp and all that stuff, and the lack of chromatic aberration and distortion is terrific, but the real story behind that camera is that you can hold it handheld, not shooting stills, but shooting video, 100, 200, 300 millimeters. It's absolutely staggering. It's amazing how good the stabilization is. I've been able to shoot all sorts of events, all sorts of wildlife, shooting video, not stills. Stills, you only have to keep it steady for a short period of time, and IBIS kicks in, but when you're shooting video at 30 frames per second, you notice if things aren't stabilized, and it's a terrific lens. The 100mm macro, terrific. What I'm shooting with the 50mm f1.2, they're all terrific lenses, and with the exception of the 100mm, they're all very, very expensive. What Canon's sorely missing in their lineup is a mid-level series of glass. They have a whole handful of entry-level lenses, and yes, these are needed, but what is really needed is affordable glass between $800, $600, and $2,000. Just take a look at Nikon's 180 to 600mm for what, $1,696? That's pretty impressive. The 100 to 500mm, while it might be better optically, it's significantly more expensive at around $2,900. And for most ordinary filmmakers or photographers, even those retired that this is their hobby, or even some pros, the cost of some of Canon's L-series glass is prohibitive and has them going to Sony because Sony has a huge mature lineup in their E-mount. And yes, I know we can use the EF to RF adapter to get that, well, EF glass over. But many people, they're going to a new platform. They just don't want to buy old glass. They want to buy new glass. And a lot of those EF lenses, they're not being made anymore. So you have to buy something old. You don't know how good it's going to be. And that's the really annoying thing here in 2023. In 2020, I bought the EF to RF adapter. I've got it here somewhere. It's right here. I brought over the EF lens, the 50mm f1.2. And back then you could buy a whole bunch of EF glass new, but today Canon has stopped producing most of the glass. So as a professional, do we want to go out there and buy used glass and use it on a shoot, not knowing if it's going to fail or not, how long it's been used and all that sort of stuff? No, we want to use new glass. So Canon, please, whenever you announce the Canon EOS R5 Mark II or later this year in the fourth quarter, please provide approvals to Sigma and Tamron to produce mid-level glass. Sure, protect some of your lenses, your focal lengths if you like, but that 180 to 600 millimeters, the 150 to 600, these are focal lengths that are sorely needed. And some of the other lenses, the 50mm f1.4, it'd be nice to have something a little bit more affordable, but optically still very good. So I hate to beat a dead horse, and I don't think I've talked about this for a very long time, but all you have to do is take a look at the comments, Canon, and you'll see that a lot of people are still really frustrated by this. Yeah, 2020, when you're still producing a lot of EF glass, a lot of EF glass new, not such an issue. But here in 2023, as we're rapidly moving to 2024, with very few EF lenses being produced, no professional wants to buy used glass for their events. To any risk of losing content, whether it be on storage, whether it be on the camera body or the lenses, it just doesn't fly. We need new glass. We need support. We need support for approval for Sigma and Tamron and others, especially for that mid-level glass. Lenses that cost between $600 and $1,600. And if you want to stay up to date on all the news and rumors concerning what's coming with the Canon EOS R5 or the big firmware update for the R5, and hopefully some of these issues could be fixed in that, but I think a lot of these issues, they've got to be on the chalkboard. And the reason I'm bringing out this video is not just to get some clicks, but I was thinking last night I wanted to do a video on the IBIS wobble because I was so frustrated after 5 days of collecting, importing, white balancing, color grading my footage. I was so angry, not at myself, partly at myself for not turning off IBIS, not thinking of it, but that this is an inherent issue with a camera that, since Peter McKinnon, Canon's ambassador, talked about on July 9th, July 8th, when they had the announcement, and it hasn't been fixed yet, it's just a lack of resources, a lack of prioritizing this. It needs to be fixed. And I get it, it only affects when you're shooting wide open at 24, 20, 16 millimeters. But boy, is it annoying. And yes, when I'm shooting around here, I'm shooting in my area, I take the gimbal, I turn off IBIS. But I shouldn't have to worry about doing that. I shouldn't have to do workarounds, not on a $4,000 camera. So what this kind of morphed into is I thought, well, that would have a rather narrow audience. I thought, well, what are the other issues I've had with the Canon EOS R5? Well, I think it's a terrific camera. There's certainly room for improvement, and that gave birth to this video. And if you want to stay up to date on all the latest news and rumors concerning the firmware update, the big one coming out for the Canon EOS R5, or the Canon EOS R5 Mark II, which is expected to be announced in the fourth quarter this year, probably late October, early November, well, then go ahead and subscribe, but make sure you also choose all notifications. And if you want to stay up to date on all the minor news and rumors or pricing information, then go ahead and follow me on Twitter. I'm constantly tweeting out information all day long, every day. And yes, in the last 2 weeks, it's been a little bit off because of my trip and, curing myself with jet lag. But there's still a huge amount of deals. Now, we can't get the Canon EOS R5 for $32.99 anymore with both a battery grip and an EF to RF adapter, but you can get it for $33.99 at Adorama and B&H. And Adorama gives out a free battery grip, as I believe does B&H. We're also seeing sales on the Nikon Z7 and Z6 Mark IIs, $400 and $300 off respectively. The Panasonic S1H, $500 off. The Canon EOS R3, $500 off. And of course, we're seeing some sales on Sony, but the Sony sales aren't nearly as aggressive as Canon, Nikon, and Panasonic. I wonder if we're getting ready for a busy fall. No. We definitely are getting ready for a busy fall full of announcements. So it looks to be a very exciting time, especially as we move from the third quarter into the fourth quarter. But that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again soon.